Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to begin the seminar momentarily. Before we begin, I'd like to give you some housekeeping announcement. The seminar will be conducted in English and Japanese. Throughout the seminar, simultaneous interpretation will be available. Please use that interpretation or globe icon on the bottom of the screen to switch the language.
Throughout this seminar, simultaneous interpretation between Japanese and English are available. Please use the interpretation icon on the screen to switch the languages. また、本日のセミナーの最後には
Additionally, at the end of today's seminar, we'll hold a Q&A session where the panelists will answer questions from our audience.
質問は匿名でパネリスト
Question will be anonymous and cast to the panelist.
オンライン参加の方
Online participants, please submit
Q&A
your questions using the Zoom's Q&A function. With in-person audience, we kindly ask that you submit your question verbally during the later part of the meetings. Please be advised that this seminar is being recorded with videotaped by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for positive and publicity purposes. We also kindly request that attendees refrain from recording the seminar themselves.
これより外務省主催令和7年度アジアエネルギー安全保障セミナーを開催いたします。
I would like to start the Asia Energy Security Seminar 2026, organized by the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs. My name is Shimada, Director of the Resource Security Division, Economic Affairs Bureau, Ministry of the Foreign Affairs. And that panelist is also being here. We'll be moderating today's session, and that panelists will be discussing in person today. The seminar is also being streamed online. We are deeply thank you the very large number of the participants and turned out. First of all, on behalf of the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, Izuru Kobayashi, the Director General for the Economic Affairs, will deliver the opening remarks. Director Kobayashi, please. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for a kind introduction. My name is Kobayashi. I am the director of that Ministry of the Foreign Affairs. On behalf of the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, the host of this event, I would like to offer my sincere gratitude to join today's seminar. In the rainy day, I'd like to offer my opening remarks. The Asian Energy Security Seminar, organized annually by the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs for over 20 years, aims to deepen understanding of Japan's initiatives and international cooperation in energy security. And this year, we would like to highlight the stable supply of the traditional energy sources like oil and natural gas, and even deepen the discussion on the role of the diplomacy in energy security. Needless to say, energy is the foundation of people's lives and economic activities for every nation. And the government must take every possible measure to ensure its stable supply. And the percentage of that fossil fuel for the Japan's energy is more than 80%, and 30% is oil, 20% is oil, and 25% is coal. On the other hand, the global environment surrounding energy security is growing increasingly unstable and murky. The soaring energy prices triggered by Russia's invasion of the Ukraine and the resulting supply disruptions have had the detrimental impact on economic activities in our lives. the Takaichi administration has also positioned energy security as one of the 17 strategic areas within its crisis management and growth investment framework, reflecting heightened attention to energy security. Countries around the world are promoting the transition to clean energy to achieve the net zero society, balancing emissions with absorption as a part of the climate change countermeasures. As Japan is committed to achieve the net zero by 2050, the energy transition is being advanced by positioning renewable energy as one of the main power sources. Energy transition is critical. Energy security is predicated by the accelerating energy transition. However, that it is hard to achieve very soon. So that for the time being, fossil fuel will remain an indispensable energy source, at least for the foreseeable future. So if you look at the global oil demand, it is expected to peak around 2030 and start declining thereafter. And domestic demand for the petroleum products in Japan is already decreasing year by year. However, the demand is still anticipated to continue for a wide range of applications as a raw material for the chemical products, making oil indispensable to the Japanese industry. Oil is continue to be crucial because the oil is easy to store and serves as an excellent energy sources for stockpiling. On the other hand, Japan relies on a single region, the Middle East, including the UAE and Saudi Arabia, for 95% of its oil imports. For the last few days, the tension heightened around Iran. It has been reported on the news. But whenever the Middle East tension escalates, this fact, 90% of its oil imports rely on the Middle East, is frequently mentioned. Therefore, to ensure stable access to these vital resources, diplomacy continues to play a crucial role in securing ceilings and building the relationship with oil-producing nations. Now, natural gas, with its lower greenhouse gas emissions compared to coal, shall become increasingly important as the baseload power source amid projected growth in electricity demand driven by the proliferation of the AI and data centers. Therefore, the gas started to consider as a base load, although it was not. While the natural gas does not suffer from the same supply concentration issue as oil, and it is stored a long term like oil. In Europe, they own the gas well, and they are able to store the gas underground. However, Japan has no gas field. Therefore, we are unable to store natural gas. Therefore, ensuring the stable gas supplies from the numerous natural gas producing countries scattered across the globe has become the strategic issue directly impacting the lives of citizens. Thus, while the traditional energy remains crucial for energy security, its stable supply for the sake of the citizens' livelihood and economic activities requires concerted public-private efforts. So today, we would like to organize this forum inviting 3 eminent experts representing international organizations, research institutions, and the front lines of the research development to discuss the role of the diplomacy in energy security. And Mr. Jason Elliott of the International Energy Agency, IEA, the most trusted international organization for the analysis and information in the energy field, which was established in response to the first oil crisis, visited Japan for this particular seminar. Thank you very much. From Japan, we welcome the Dr. Takefumi Yanagisawa from the Institute of Energy Economics Japan, a leading comprehensive think tank in the energy field, and Mr. Ken Azuka from Impex Corporation, a major oil and natural gas developer representing the private sector. We would like to thank all of the panelists for taking time out of your very busy schedule to participate in the seminar. Thank you so much. I hope that today's seminar, featuring the analysis and perspectives from the panelists representing diverse viewpoints, diverse and stimulating viewpoints on the role of the democracy in energy security, will provide an opportunity for all participants to deepen their understanding of the energy security. Thank you very much for your attention. With that, I would like to conclude my opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kobayashi. Next, we would like to move on to the first session, and we will move on to the key speech of session one. From international organization, think tanks, and private sectors will provide insights into the current landscape of energy security risks, oil and gas assets, and energy security, and discuss Japan's current positions and challenges. Today, we have Mr. Jason Elliott, head of Energy Security and Emerging Divisions at the International Energy Agency, IEA. Mr. Elliott has been with IEA since 1999, serving as a senior energy security analyst since May 2018. In his current role, he leads the division responsible for energy security in emergency response, including the coordination of joint crude oil stock releases, which form the core of the IEA's energy security activities. Today, Mr. Elliott will share his perspectives on global trends in oil and natural gas energy security and discuss Japan's role and position within this evolving international framework. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Jason Elliott.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Jason, and I'm responsible for the team in the IEA that is really at the core activity of the reasons for the creation of the IEA, which is the emergency response mechanism to deal with oil supply crisis. So we're the team that maintains that system at the ready and also coordinates in the case of a collective action. But today I've been asked to come and speak with you about global trends and Japan's position in an international perspective. And so I'd like to start with my first slide, if I may ask for that to be advanced. Thank you. I'd like to start with my first slide to talk about the global broader picture of energy outlook. I'd like to thank Mr. Kobayashi previously to the kind words that he mentioned about the IEA. And of course, the IEA does quite a bit of research and studies on global markets, both current and past trends and future outlooks. And in the outlooks, both in the current policies and stated policy scenarios, we see renewables growth to be very strong, bringing both benefits and also new challenges for energy security. However, as Mr. Kobayashi mentioned, in both scenarios, oil and gas remain significant parts of the global energy supply going forward, in particular to 2030, but even in beyond 2030 through to 2050. These will be remaining to be significant energy sources. There are, however, significant regional differences. We know that advanced economies see faster growth in clean energy and plateauing fossil fuel demand, whereas emerging economies, many of them in the developing world, will continue to see rising overall energy demand, including for oil and gas. But globally, oil and gas do not decline sharply in these scenarios, so we must remain vigilant to the traditional energy security risks in the long term. So now, in my next slide, focusing on specifically the outlook for Japan, as we see in this slide, oil and natural gas demand and renewables capacities for the two advanced OECD economies, as we put them in our outlooks for Japan and Korea. Japan's outlook is broadly consistent with many other advanced economies. There is a transition to renewables and increased nuclear consumption, but reliance on imported fuels persists. Under both IEA scenarios, renewables capacity rises steadily through 2040. However, natural gas remains a core fuel in power generation, reflecting its role in systems flexibility and reliability. Oil demand continues its long-term decline, particularly in transport, but it nonetheless remains a substantial part of Japan's energy mix. Next slide. Now, for the next few slides, I would like to talk about specifically the outlook for oil and gas security. As you can see here, in the near term, global oil and gas markets are expected to become looser. In oil markets, supply is outpacing demand in the near term, and increased OPEC plus spare capacity should provide a buffer against short-term disruptions to some extent. In the LNG markets, a significant wave of new export capacity is coming online towards 2030. This expansion of LNG supply should ease the extreme tightness we've seen in recent years. However, easing market tightness does not mean risks disappear, and it's far from it. In my next slide, as you see, and as was mentioned, the geopolitical risks that put at risk these ample supplies that we have currently. Major structural risks in global oil markets is the heavy reliance on maritime choke points. A significant share of global traded crude oil passes through narrow and vulnerable routes, such as the Strait of Hormuz and the Strait of Malacca. For Asian importers, this exposure is particularly acute. As you can see on the chart on the right, Japan relies on the Middle East for the majority of its crude imports, meaning large portions of the supply transit these choke points. Any disruption, whether due to geopolitical tension, conflict, or physical blockage, could have immediate impacts on supply and prices. For Japan, choke point risks exposure remains one of the most significant structural energy security risks, and this is relevant for LNG as well. Next slide, please. Now, to speak a little more broadly on oil security challenges, as you see in this chart, it's illustrating a structural shift in global oil markets where oil demand growth is now concentrated in emerging and developing economies. In the IEA's stated policy scenario, OECD's share of global oil demand continues to decline over the time. This means non-OECD countries are becoming increasingly exposed to market supply risks themselves. Many emerging economies have low or no emergency oil stocks. They're less diversified supply chains and more limited emergency response frameworks. From the IEA's perspective, strengthening oil emergency preparedness globally is essential, not only within OECD countries, but also through broader international cooperation. So, oil security is becoming truly global as it challenges and changes with demand shifting geographically. Next slide, please. Another important structural shift is happening in refining. New refining capacity is increasingly concentrated in emerging Asian economies and the Middle East. At the same time, the mature economies, including Japan, are seeing capacity rationalizations as demand plateaus and begins to decline. In Japan, refinery output has fallen significantly compared to the 2005 levels, reflecting structural demand decline. But the energy security risk is that refining capacity closes faster than demand declines. Import dependency for refined products could increase, and exposure to supply disruptions can therefore increase even as demand falls. This will also put into question a challenge of how our strategic oil stockholding system is relevant for the current trends in oil consumption in the country. Next slide, please. Another key point to be taken into account is the longer-term risk in insufficient investment in oil and gas supply. As the IEA demonstrated in a recent report, continued investment in oil and gas remains necessary. This investment is not about meeting demand growth. It's primarily about offsetting natural decline rates from existing fields. As you can see here, natural decline rates are significant, and they're growing. Without sufficient upstream investment, supply could tighten structurally in the 2030s and beyond, as production would fall much faster than demand. As a result, the prospect of supply disruptions could increase and their impact would be exacerbated when they do occur. So because of all these risks, and because of the serious consequences of an oil supply disruption on economies, even with declining oil demand, oil emergency response remains critical. As this picture shows, a recent oil emergency response exercise held in the IEA in November of 2024. We do these types of exercises every 2 years. This brings together senior officials responsible for oil security from across all IEA member countries, including Japan and our partner countries. We simulate a major global oil supply disruption to test the coordination, decision-making, and response mechanisms in real time. Exercises like these are essential to maintain readiness, strengthen coordination, and ensure a rapid, credible response in the case of a crisis. So now in the next couple of slides, I'd like to just briefly mention a few of the dimensions of energy security that the IEA continues to build its capacities on and look in more detail. So governments around the world are strongly focused on electricity security. This is because we're now entering what the IEA calls the age of electricity. Global electricity demand is growing rapidly, and growth is accelerating compared to previous decades. This is driven by structural trends: electrification in transport and heating, expansion of data centers and AI, industrial growth in emerging economies, and rising cooling demand due to higher temperatures. Electricity is becoming the backbone of modern economies, which means power system reliability is now central to energy security. Another core energy security risk that we are focusing on intensely at the IEA relates to key energy-related critical minerals. As we expand clean energy technologies, we also become more reliant on critical minerals such as lithium, nickel, cobalt, copper, graphite, and rare earth elements. A key risk highlighted here is supply concentration. In many cases, production and processing are dominated by a small number of countries. In the IEA's N-1 analysis, this shows what happens if the largest supplier is removed from the market, both as a supplier and a consumer. And in several minerals, supply would fall short of demand. This means that even in a well-supplied market, dependence on one dominant supplier creates structural vulnerabilities. And finally, a last slide I will end my presentation on is touching on another growing energy security risk that impacts all countries, and that is the threat from extreme weather. Energy infrastructure, power plants, transmission lines, fuel supply chains, and mining operations are increasingly exposed to climate-related risks. For Japan, these risks are acute. Typhoons and extreme rainfall, flooding and storm surges, heat waves, snowfall. This means the resilience is no longer an option and must be built into infrastructures, planning, grid design, and emergency response. With that, I'll end my presentation. Look forward to our discussions later. Thank you.
エリオット課長、ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. So the demand for gas and the oil will plateau, not diminish significantly. The question is how to cover the demand, how to secure the supply, the increasing demand in the age of the electricity that makes necessitate to secure the electricity supply and the vulnerability to the critical minerals. Last week, there is the cabinet meetings organized by the IEA, and it is organized by ERI. And there, one of the major agendas includes those items that I just discussed. Thank you very much, Mr. Elliott. Now let's introduce Dr. Takafumi Yanagisawa, Executive Analyst, Gas Group Manager, Energy Security Unit, the Institute of Energy Economics Japan. After working in LNG, uranium, and coal businesses at Japanese private companies, Dr. Yanagisawa has been conducting research at the IEE Japan since 2021 on international energy trends and Japan's resource and energy policies. Since July last year, he has served as the manager of the gas group within the Resources, Fuels, and Energy Security Unit. He currently lectures at Middle Eastern economics and the history of the international resource diplomacy at several universities in Japan. Today, Dr. Yanagisawa will explain the challenges Japan has faced in security stable oil and gas supplies, as well as the current and future challenges Japan may face in the region from the perspectives of Japan's eminent think tank. Dr. Yanagisawa, the podium is yours. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. My name is Yanagisawa. I'm from IEJ. Now, I would like to make the presentation over the challenges of the stable supply of the oil and the gas that Japan has been facing. Now, what is the criticality of the oil and the gas? Remember that it was approved at the Cabinet Office, the 7th Strategic Energy Plan, and that highlighting the progress of the renewable energy technologies, cost reductions, and uncertainty. And they provided 5 different scenarios for the energy demand and supply outlook in the 2040. And for right-hand side in this chart, so that if under the risk scenario there would be sufficient cost reductions or the progress of that real renewable energy technologies, and the demand for the oil is 0.9 to the 120 million kiloliters, and that would increase for the FY 2040, so that they say that the demand for the natural gas for 0.9 to the 1.2 oku kiloliters, and for the oil, 170 million kiloliter to the 190. So there is a big decline is expected. However, that the oil would occupy more than 20% of the primary energy, so that that's the biggest fuel in Japan, so that the importance of the oil and the gas will sustain, and that for the sake of the stable supply of the Japanese basic energy, that we have to secure the oil and gas security. So let's look at the energy or emergency preparedness for the oil and gas in Japan. So how that Japan addressed with the security crisis. So that forced Middle East war led Arab oil-producing nations to implement an oil embargo against that country supporting Israel. Japan was designated as non-friendly nation and warned that unless it declares itself pro-Arab, it would face supply cuts. Therefore, Japan faced a diplomatic dilemma between the U.S. labeled anti-Arab and Arab oil-producing nations. And short-term, the dialogue with Arab side, a chief cabinet secretary's statement, a deputy prime minister's visit, the initial membership in the U.S.-led IEA, so that Japan tried to take the balanced diplomacy between that anti-Arab and pro-Arab. Mid-term to long-term, the diversification of the domestic energy supply like LNG and the nuclear power has been strengthening for the oil reserve in cooperation with the IEA and the international forums or dialogue between the producers and consumer nations through the IEF and LNG producer consumer conferences. And so 1973, this is a comparison between 1973 and FY 2024. On the top of the list, that is the imported oil from the Middle East. so that number reduced from 220 million to the 130 million kiloliters. And that the oil as a percentage of the total primary energy declined from 77% to the 35%. It is a significant reduction. Although that Japan still relies on the Middle East for 25% of the imported oil, however, that we rely on the Middle East by 1% for the LNG. Therefore, that the Middle East as a percentage of the primary energy reliance declined from 60% and 36%. At the time of the stockpiling of oil, that equivalent to 56 days, but it increased to the true 43 days. And then if you look at the breakdown of the stockpiling, not only the private, but also the private, state-owned, and the joint producing countries, that including that the Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Kuwait, that we lend the tanks to those countries to ensure that stockpiling. Now, let's look at the Japan's responses after the 9/11. So during this period, from that 1989 to the 2001, the geopolitical risk heightened. Of course, the direct impact from that, the warfare or the repercussion of the conflict. Now, the Iran-Libya sanctions law, that it was 1996, and it was executed from that Obama administration or the Bush administration after 9/11, so that all of that, the third countries and third countries companies are subject to this retaliation or the sanctions if those companies have that business in the Iran or other Middle East countries. Now, under the Cold War, that there is the capitalism bloc or communist bloc, so that is a conflict. It was a Cold War. However, from the perspective of that collaboration of the the capitalist countries, that they respect that the business independence. But after the Cold War, there is only one strong nation in the world, that the U.S. have started to show no hesitation to give that the pressure over the private sectors, so that that signifies, or a symbol is the withdrawal of Japanese companies in Iran's Azerbaijan oil field. So that Japanese companies received that the growing tension and the pressure from the U.S. government to do a business in Iran. And the second one, while that the China has shown that the blistering economic growth, and they expand oil and gas import and tried to engage in the competition of the resources around the world, so that China is super aggressive importing at the same time that developing the oil field. So that after the Japanese companies withdraw from Iran, China's state-owned oil companies enter into Iran and take over the authority and right over the oil field. Now, for more concrete initiatives, you can see in the letters in the blue color. The first one is that the oil-producing countries joint stockpiling or bilateral investment agreement, so that Japan concluded the investment agreement with oil-producing companies. Although there is a condition that both parties agreed upon, but sometimes that they would. It is possible that would raise to that international court, so that would give some pressures to the oil-producing countries. But I simultaneously, Japan concluded multilateral investment agreement. The typical example is ECT and EITI. And as I mentioned, the oil producing and consuming countries dialogue, so that is led by IEF, and Japan is very proactively engaging in those dialogues and activities. And that very recent example is the strengthening the sanctions against Russia and the turmoil in the global oil and gas market after the Russian invasion to Ukraine. As for oil, collaborating IEA, Japan released that oil stockpiling to stabilize the oil market. We also engage in the IEA gas task force, and that we jointly organize the LNG producer consumer conference together with IEA. During these activities, that Japan tries to stabilize the market through the promotion of the dialogue with the producer-consumer countries or the gas reserve. As Mr. Kobayashi mentioned, that LNG could be liquefied. It is hard to store for a long term, while in Europe, that they stockpile that gas underground. On the other hand, Japan is suffering from that scarcity of that field or the land to stockpile the LNG. Therefore, it is all about the diversification of the countries that we import LNG. And we also reaching out to the international community through the diplomacy for the investment and the sustained procurement of the Sakhalin-2 LNG business. And we support the Energy Charter Amendment, therefore that we are making an effort to document the process of the resolutions of that conflict. And we also strengthening the government support for the LNG long-term contract conclusion as a part of the 7th Strategic Energy Plan, and LNG's importance is described. And that early last week, that the LNG, the long-term contract, JERA and Qatar concluded that contract, and the Japanese government involved in that, and they make the memorandum of the additional supply cooperation to Japan with Qatar. And through the other zero-emission community, that Japan strengthening the collaboration with Asian countries, and that we laying the directions of the diversified path to the net zero or carbon decarbonization of the methodology, depending on that each region. And as for the sea-lane issues, that Japan is strengthening that the like-minded countries at the time of the energy emergency. And finally, that for the security of Japan, I think that from the perspective of the sustainability and the economicality, that private companies should be the pivotal role. On the other hand, that energy is politicized and weaponized, so that to that risk, that the government should step in and ensure that energy through the diplomacy. Since that Japan relies on all of the import of the oil and the gas, it is critical for Japan to stabilize the international energy market. Japan should lead the initiatives to stabilization, so that Japan should reach out to the supply and the demand countries and promote that dialogue. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. So the challenges of that energy supply and that Japan's initiatives in the past, so that looking at the history, so it is the perspectives in the situation of the oil is determined primarily by the market. However, that through the diplomacy that the Japan will contribute to stabilize the market, there are some ways to secure the energy.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Mr. Ezuka join the producer of INPEX Corporation, the International Petroleum Exploration Company, in 2006. Since then, he has built extensive experience in the field of corporate planning, accounting, and finance within the organization. From 2018 to 2025, he was stationed in Western Australia, where he contributed to the company's LNG project operations. He has also been engaging in various aspects of INPEX's oil and gas business. Currently, he serves as general manager of the corporate strategy and planning unit, playing a key role in the company's strategic management and planning. Today, Mr. Ezuka will bring in introducing INPEX's business activities from the perspective of one of Japan's new companies with upstream operational capabilities in oil and natural gas. Thank you so much. I am Ezuka from INPEX Corporation, in Japan's largest energy development company. For our perspective as a corporate, INPEX today we'll be giving you an overview with our largest scale energy development company. This page gives an indication of our corporate, as Japan being the country of core energy. 90% of our sales is for production, and this is the benchmark of our production and a benchmark to scale productions. We have 600,000 energy as a barrel, and we have Australia projects, and as an operator we have projects, and 40% are foreign employees. INPEX's business area, we usually use upstream development, so we would like to explain how this upstream represents in this slide. For example, as a river, there is upstream and downstream. For INPEX, this upstream development and production is our business style. Therefore, regarding oil, Japan's original producers, that's where we sell in these super major corporates. And on the other hand, we have natural gases which are domestically, which hold a pipeline within domestic, so we do supply to those as well. And for super major, we handle upstream until downstream. And for INPEX, we are more focused on upstream. This is our major regions that we put our main business. I would like to abbreviate regarding the time, but we would like to talk about Abu Dhabi and Southeast Asia. Later, we would like to talk about Australia on a different slide. Our company, Abu Dhabi, we have since 1976 Japan oil development production. So for Abu Dhabi, we have a 50 years partnership in Abu Dhabi. Regarding our offshore oil field and onshore concession for Abu Dhabi, we would like to continue exploration and expand. For 2010, we had some discussions, and this is one expansion performance that we have, and this is our core business. In the future, we have Southeast Asia, like Indonesia. We have Abadi LNG, which is a huge investment project, and we are continuing. We have a huge project amount, and now we're in the stage of architecture, and 27 we will have final investment decision, which will be in 2027 is our idea. Next will be our LNG project for Axis. We have 3 major projects, and this is one project, and that's how we say in our language. We have 2 major places, such as the LNG project operated by Impex Corporation. We have the integrated full value chain stretching of offshore gas production to onshore liquefaction export project. So from the underland gas field, we have approximately 9.3 million tons, which is the pipeline of Australia's Darwin, which we export and then we import to Japan. So this is around 9.3 million tons equivalent, and 70% is for domestic Japan, and then exception is to Taiwan. Partially, we have some cargoes. We have domestic pipelines in Naoetsu LNG plant. So this is our LNG Naoetsu terminal plant. And this 1,500 kilometers natural pipeline delivered to customers. People may know that in Niigata, Japan's energy supply stability in region Minami Nagaoka gas field is also a domestic merged and which deliver to other parts of Japan. This is our direction. Next, we would like to cover our key characteristics of oil and natural gas development projects, how we provide to public sectors. This is a simplified project life cycle, and as you can see, these projects are very long-term and high risks. Therefore, Ablano project, or if it's a natural gas project and what kind of life cycle, those differ. But like I mentioned, the Axis project, it started from 1998 and 2018 was the first Legion cargo. So that's approximately 20 years that took. And also even production, we take 30 to 40 years. Thus, it's a 60 years project and development. That also must be a risk that will happen in this long project life cycle. Also for exploration, these are exploration that we mention. Also these explorations have dependencies, and if it's billions or 2 billions for one exploration, it may be great, but then there's a risk if we cannot find. So, having said that, LNG project at Axis for development, capex is huge, and capital expenditure development assets are also a risk. For project, we also have interest in oil and gas projects, risk sharing. It's not possible to have 100% for one corporate, maybe 3 to 4 to 5 collaborations, and within that, maybe one operator, we choose one, and then proceed. This will be our business model. Thus, of course, within the project, we have joint ventures, and we do activities. Other than that, like you see on the bottom diagram, Regarding architecture, there's development with the constructions and also the finance sector. We have banks or securities and also insurance. And when it comes to production, we have the buyers and one who transport. So we have maritime and local community that we very much treasure and have a peer alliance. Host country government is very key and essential for us. Thus, this is our background, and having said that, in the top we have how do we finalize stakeholders. So these are a little theoretical, but these are our points. Usually, risks allocated with reserves, development costs, and schedule, production, and operation as vulnerability. So also to see how much supply and stability it is when it runs, and also any gaps, and the trends also must be analytical. Thus, we put that into the budget and actual changes with the environment. Within these 5 years, oil, natural gas has been very changing, and there were some dependencies, as I mentioned in the first, energy transition importance. 2000 and beyond, there was a trend that was strong. Maybe oil and natural gas wasn't so necessary. From that flow, 2 to 3 years, energy transition is also important, but also energy stability, affordability is also a trilemma to be balanced and managed feasibly. Also, energy addition is energy demand will upstream. So how is the balance? And also, Mr. Jason Elliott has mentioned about the importance of a persistency of ensuring assets. These must be considered, and it's a very long project life cycle, as I mentioned, so it's very important to have this project consistency with the host country and government. Thus, there are risks for private sectors. Regarding investment, it's very important to see the host country's budget. When it comes to investment environment, how is the host country's demand and supply with energy? How is the transport and the stability of asset and investment needs to be handled? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So for the sustained business for long term, necessitate the maintenance of the very good relationship with the host country, and that the diplomacy plays a pivotal role for the bilateral or multilateral relationship. With that, I'd like to conclude that the major lectures, so that we would like to change, setting the stage for the panel discussion. Please bear with us.
それでは第2部ラウンドテーブルディスカッションに移りたいと
We will now move on to session 2, the
3
round
人
table.
のパネリスト
In
の
this session, our 3 panelists will each share their perspectives on the role of diplomacy in ensuring Japan's energy security, particularly with regarding to maintaining a stable supply of oil, which remains an essential energy source for a wide range of uses, including fuel and strategic reserves, and natural gas, which serves as a key baseload power source for Japan. And so from here, Shimada-san will ask questions, and we have 3 main points. First, how is Japan's regarding energies, worldwide energy? Where does Japan stand? Number 2, for stable supplyment and to find stable supplying. And number 3, when it comes to strong demand and supply, what will be the government's roles? These will be the questions. Number 1. Today, Mr. Jason Elliott is here, and he is from IEA. The IEA is a group of consuming countries established to respond to supply reduction during the oil crisis. In the past, markets were shaped by the interplay between the IEA as the consumers group and OPEC as the producers group. Today, however, non-OPEC producers like United States and Russia have risen in oil, and there is no producers group for natural gas and that functions like OPEC. So the IEA itself now includes LNG producing countries such as the United States, Australia, making national positions complex. In this environment, how has the IEA's role evolved, and how should Japan conduct itself under these circumstances? And we would like to hear from Yanagisawa-san.
Thank you very much, and that's a very relevant topic for the discussion on where the IEA came. I know Mr. Yanagisawa, sorry for your name pronunciation, but did a very good job of discussing some of the history of the setting of the IEA when it was created. Really, in markets that are quite different from today, the 1970s, with the political threat, the use of oil as a weapon by some of the OPEC countries, and the need for those countries to come together to respond. And in that time, Japan being a very critical member of the IEA, along with the United States and key European countries, that developed from the start, getting more transparency to the market, better data, better analysis, and better working systems with structures within the IEA's mechanism for working together and cooperating. And that's really been the strength of the IEA in the 50 plus years that it's existed, is developing this capacity to deal with disruptions. But the risks have changed quite substantially. I think in my presentation, I tried to focus or show some of the trends that are affecting the risks that we see now. And so in today's world, we really need to be able to to respond to disruptions that can come from various sources, various aspects. The fact that much of the oil production is coming from countries that are now within the IEA. This is a very important aspect of supply security that brings additional supply. But of course, even in a well-supplied market, as I mentioned, disruptions, for example, through key choke points, disruptions through geopolitical conflict, also extreme weather events, those can all come to a point where markets are unable to deal with that, because in the end, markets are the first line, and we help markets by helping promote data transparency and better analysis. But when markets aren't able to respond to those events, we need to have systems in place that respond very rapidly to that event in order to bring supply while markets prepare themselves. In the past, this was maybe to respond to OPEC's holding off oil off the market, but today this is more in having the event, the crisis which is responded to be adapted by markets and for markets to be able to come back online. So it does change to some extent how our countries are looking at responding, how they prepare, how they view their domestic, their national emergency response, and then on a global market, in a very fungible market. And so the way today, as I mentioned, the demand leaving IEA countries is very critical that we get countries outside of the current IEA membership to start also participating in the emergency response aspects, how to deal with a crisis. And so promoting emergency response, promoting strategic stockholding in those regions, in those countries is very critical. And Japan has played a critical role in Southeast Asian countries in promoting the need for emergency oil stockholding and to look at how to improve security regionally. That I think is a critical role that Japan will play. When it comes to LNG, I mentioned for the gas markets, we see significant demand growth for LNG, for liquid gas in Europe since the war, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And this has led to quite an increase in demand for LNG in the global markets. And we're seeing very significant expansion in the coming years. And so we have a very significant change in global gas markets. But I think what that will mean is an interlinkage between Japan and Europe when it comes to that market becoming much more liquid. And so a need to look together through IEA countries on how to improve gas security, I think is a critical role for Japan going forward as well. I think maybe I'll stop there.
ありがとうございます。それでは柳沢さんよろしく。
Thank you so much. Mr. Yanagisawa, please continue. So how would Japan be able to work around in such a crisis? After oil crisis, IEA's consumption and demand for demanding countries, it's been we have a positive behavior to communicating. IEF, LNG discussions, those are some of the conferences. And also importing countries, USA, major importing countries. There was a shale renovation, and also it became one of the most important countries for foreign diplomacy. And there are some changes for foreign diplomacy from that US demand, and also for demand and supply for Japan. These energy demand and energy modest is very important for Japan, and we are going to be very much impacted. Therefore, we would continue to become the consumer and supplying country to have a stable global initiative. As per supplying, we would like to provide in a expensive value, but as a consumer, there's a gap because of those economics. However, the stability of economy and stability of maintaining should be handled. If it's too expensive, people are not going to buy from oil and gases. If it's too cheap, then regarding assets or constructions, those are going to be stopped. And so procurement and also to have persistency, it is very important for both the supplier and the consumer to be balancing, and Japan would like to show leadership. and have a continuous discussion with different partners. And Japan will take foreign diplomacy as a positive, and we would like to continue these between nations.
ありがとうございます。その石油や天然ガスの産出国
So for the oil and the natural gas, now Japan is between, located is between the producer and the consumer countries, and then striking the balance is the way that Japanese diplomacy plays a role.
生産国という
Now, there are a lot of the producing countries around the world, and to what point that the points that we need to look at to look around that the potential producers or the source of supply. The Impex Corporation is a Japanese company engaged in oil and natural gas production. In both oil and gas, newly discovered supply sources have influenced Japan's strategies for securing stable supplies.
今現在特に
Are there any regions you're particularly focusing on now, or are there any regions that you put growing focus on moving forward? Mr. Ezuka, please. Thank you very much for the question. From our company's standpoint, as I explained in a presentation, and that there are 5 highlighted areas that we call it core areas. So based on our past expertise and collaboration and cooperation of the communities could be leveraged to the maximum level. The Abu Dhabi is the one example. Now, this is a country where the supply of U.S. is increasing, and the production capacity in Brazil and other countries are increasing. So that changes the dynamics in the market. But looking at the FY 2050, that we should not forget the importance of the OPEC countries' capabilities. We continued this business for 50 years. So in the countries like Abu Dhabi, that UAE is committed to increase that production capacity. Therefore, that it is our commitment to make the contribution to those areas. And if it is possible to expand the train in Australia, that initiative will contribute to the security and the safety of that energy. And the Asian areas that impacts is not committed to so many areas in Asia except that Papua New Guinea. So the Qatar and the Middle East is the powerful producing countries. However, that the most prominent source demand comes from that Asian country, so that is how we drive our growth. Thank you very much. You mentioned that the relationship between the producing countries and Japan and what behavior Japan should take, and for the secure supply of the oil, in addition to the development of the upstream, that we have to make sure to build that secure and economically make sense end-to-end economic ecosystem. And what to secure Japan oil and gas supplies, that what points require particular considerations that including the transport and refining infrastructure and weighing cost and the benefits. This question goes to Dr. Yanagisawa. Thank you very much for the question. As you can see, that Japan needs to procure the oil in a secure and a stable manner, that we have to look at the end-to-end ecosystem, keeping that the consideration on the economic benefits. When we think about the energy securities and the stable energy supply, Japan needs to diversify the supply sources. And when we think about the business, not only the upstream, that we need to go to the downstream and diversify the businesses, including that the logistics and the supply chains. So this business diversification means that risk diversification, and that leads to the cost benefit improvement. On the other hand, that we face the one challenge that is how to deal with that frontier project, that the Japanese company have to enter into that frontier project development or untamed project. Why that those areas are untamed? It is because that security or the development conditions did not make economic sense. That's why that alienate Japanese companies to enter into that market. So there are a lot of the risks, the business risks, security risks, or geopolitical risks. Therefore, it is hard decision for the private company, but if it makes that the national security sense, that the government should offer the support, so that is the private-public collaboration for the more energy security. Thank you very much, Dr. Yanagisawa. Now, so the competition for the resources in the international energy market intensifies. Let's look at the roles of the government. So the things like the Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, the situation in Venezuela, energy policies in the Europe or US, or solidarity within the Southeast Asia, or China's expanding influence, and other change of the dynamics in the market, so that including that the long-term and perspectives, so that the international geopolitical situation make an impact on the energy market. So in this context, what should the Japanese government do to secure a stable supply of oil and gas? To what extent should the government play a leading role? Of course, that it differs for one country to another. Therefore, could you please share your views, what the roles of the Japanese government can do? The question goes to Mr. Elliott and Dr. Yanagisawa.
Thank you for the opportunity to jump in first. I think, as I mentioned in my presentation about the easing of market tightness in the coming 5 years out to 2030 is substantive. But nevertheless, even in a looser short-term market, the risks of oil and gas disruptions remain very high. And so it's a very pertinent question for the short term, but also in the longer term, as we see the challenges coming from transitioning away from oil and gas, moving to cleaner energy systems. This will require that we have a long-term outlook on what is the future role of oil and gas and how to maintain supply security throughout that period. We know that the geopolitical shocks that we're always potentially facing can have significant price effects and can have significant negative effects on our society. So it's really important that countries remain vigilant on this. And I think Japan, as all countries, has already a very robust system in place, but must be remaining vigilant that this continues to be fit for purpose and able to respond effectively as the markets evolve. So what could be done to strengthen oil and gas security? I think first is to continue to seek to diversify sources of supply, both for oil and gas. It will be important to avoid excessive reliance on any single country supply route or contractual structures, in particular thinking of LNG. Japan should maintain a very high level of emergency preparedness as it currently has, but ensure that this is maintained through its strategic oil stocks, but also gas stocks, and insurance that these can be rapidly deployed effectively when needed. But also the gas and oil infrastructure needs to be maintained sufficient through the longer term, ensuring that this is sufficient and fit for purpose, even as demand begins to decline. And I think that's going to be one of the key challenges in the decades to come. Like all countries, Japan is undertaking long-term energy security planning with the recognition that we will continue to need oil and gas in our energy systems, as these will have a significant role for the foreseeable future. But it will seek to steadily reduce vulnerability to oil and gas through improvements in things like energy efficiency and promotion of alternative fuel technologies. But emergency response in oil and gas markets are really a global question. These are global markets, very liquid and very fungible. Gas becoming more and more the case as oil has for a long time been. So a disruption on the global markets will impact all countries, and response, effective response on those markets is really important that this be done at a broad international level. And that's why I think it's so critical for outreach to regional partners, so countries in Southeast Asia, getting them to commence to preparing themselves for responding to disruptions is key. I think Japan plays a very critical role in doing that regionally, but as a member of the IEA globally. That would be also the case for LNG, is to look, as was mentioned earlier, about the IEA's gas working party, is to look with partners regionally at potential ways to improve gas security at a global level and what could be done structurally for ensuring response in those cases. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。それでは柳沢さん。
Now, Dr. Yanagisawa, please. Thank you very much. Well, it's a very good question. We have been discussing this for some time, so that there is a intensified competition of securing the resources. So in the past, that the corporate business is driving to securing the resources, but it is no longer the case because there are the growing risk. Therefore, that this uncertainty of the introduction of the renewable energy, it's one of the biggest risks that it's not foreseeable or it is not clear. So for the uncertainty, I think that the government can step in the process of the securing the energy. And as I mentioned in my report, basically, this is my personal perspective. However, there is an international market for the oil and gas, but the supply from business is important for the sustainable supply or securing that energy. For the stable market, that the stable diplomacy is all about. So the stable diplomacy or stable international or geopolitical situation is a must for the stable supply of the oil. So in that area, that the Japanese government, the government can play a critical role. When we compare the Japan with Japan, so the China, that the state-owned companies is leading that initiatives to develop that resources. So there we need to acknowledge that there are different situations. The Chinese economy is a state-owned and driven by the communist one-party state, the Communist Party, and that the China is producing oil internally, and also they are importing oil and then trying to strike the balance. So that Chinese economic structure is quite different from the Japanese structure. Therefore, that one solution cannot fit all. So it is reckless that Chinese we are applying that Chinese way to Japan, so that the French is Qatar Energy and ENI on Italy. Those companies used to be that state-owned company, but those companies are privatized. So it is not sufficient that only that the nation-driven or government-driven business would not sustain because that they are not the profit-seeking entity. Therefore, I think that the sustainable model is that the government is offering the support to the private sector, and the private sector is that the primary instigator of the securing that energy. Thank you very much, Dr. Yanagisawa. To deal with the geopolitical risks, the government, Japanese government, have to make the important role to stabilize the market. The situations differs one country to another. So the question is how the Japan built that good relationship with other countries. And the last question, that question goes to the Mr. Ezuka. So you are in the front line of the energy development, and you belong to the private companies. Therefore, to deal with the challenges, if there are the government initiatives that you value, or what do you expect from the Japanese government to play a role?
Thank you so much. As per your question, in the past, I would like to highlight some events that happened in the past. First, as per my presentation, like I mentioned, regarding foreign diplomacy, this is the core infrastructure. And to Japan, what is the host country's thoughts, and country to country, and also nationalists' thoughts, those are also involved. And for UK, maybe asset is too much to say, but it's also an infrastructure and core. So saying as a core, Abu Dhabi's example, 2010 and until the end of 2000s, this is not just to Japan, but China, India, Korea, also any other benefits like Europe, USA. Those beneficials had some, and for us, we've been in operation for 50 years ago. So it's very important to have these resource, foreign affairs, and to UAE. I have been continuously going to UAE, and we have had some beneficiaries there. We are more, so the next part is more about covering how to procure assets. LNG capex is very large. For projects, it's like trillions, billions, so it costs a lot of assets and money for the investment. So traditionally, we need government support, and as per government support, JVIC, NEXI, financing support, and also JOVMEC needs to be involved. Thus, JVIC, NEXI, JOVMEC, assets, and also insurance. These need to be a resource stability to be aligned for a government within Japan, and these policies need to be in the future persistent. That's my thoughts. And also regarding foreign affairs and the future of foreign affairs, like I mentioned, 2 points. We would like it'll be very helpful if they continue and persist. Regarding last year until this year, there's been different discussions about energy becoming exposed to geopolitical risks, and that those are being like written, documented, and data centers energies need to be supplied. Energy addition is also energy becoming something more core to people and public. So this is more political and also a discussion that needs to that are discussed. So these stability of assets and investment, we would like in the future to have the stability of investment. We need G2G exchange of these discussions. per G2G with peer alliance countries. So we do need to think and focus about the other country and also to ensure our supply and have an open discussion regarding foreign affairs is also important, and to build this relationship. Thank you so much. I have been working in the foreign affairs, and usually energy is not the only topic. So it has to be in nations and also different aspects of peer countries. So these daily activities, and it's very important to have stability and the assets and investments to become more beneficial and to become the core of energy corporates. I understood. Thank you so much. Then we would like to close the part for the questions that I prepared. From here, we would like to do a Q&A session. We would like to collect from everybody who are participating, and also online participants. Feel free to use the function of Zoom Q&A. So please send us questions. So maybe somebody from the participant in the hall. Good afternoon, Asia, Africa, Foreign Affairs. It's very lefty these days, and we also have midterm new policies last year in summer. For your country is your country. This is kind of a global speeded energy importing. Japan is very dependent on importing oil. So do you think we should proceed with this, or anything about your opinion would also help? Thank you so much. Maybe Yanagisawa-san could answer this question. Thank you so much for your question. As you mentioned, yes, regarding geopolitical risks and tensions, there's some blocked your country has to handle within your country. I understood. And these kind of movement for Japan, it's very, it impacts a lot for us in Japan. So for this point for Japan, we would like to do import and exporting in this market, and to understand we cannot always just say this continuously, because those who hold resources would not understand. So we do need to have a win-win situation approach, and it's necessary. So this win-win for the resource holders, one would be through the market to export and to ensure where we can export it. And also for the resource companies, it will have a win support for assets, and if it's new development or new technologies, having seen in maybe the third-party countries regarding the diversification for hydrogen, ammonia, and maybe e-methane. These oil and gas are very critical, but also for midterm and long term, we do need to have a revenue and revenue stability. So these resource countries do need new energies. Thus, for Japan, the technology, we do put assets, so we do have this strong technology for Japan, and we are able to have a win-win situation and approach that is very necessary. Thank you so much. Next, we would like to take a question. ICC Intelligence David, thank you so much for your very interesting presentation. I have a question for Yanagisawa-san. For your procurement diversification and any risks and separation with risks, you did have two examples. Saharan's assets and investment and to get understanding and agreement. That was one. Next, Qatar. Both are very geopolitical risk, high geopolitical risk as examples, I think. Saharins has G7 involved, national partner alliance team. I don't think you're able to get an agreement there. And for Qatar, Hamas, Plato is there. So that's case closed. So other than that, where is the handling that you did? Or did you have any projects, but it was too small? Or was it kind of like you were looking for expansion? Or are you looking for a new project? So is there any movement, forecast? I would like to know your opinion. Thank you so much. As you mentioned, the examples that you mentioned, like risks, of course, they exist. Having said LNG and oil, those are very country risks, do have some discrepancies, and I understand they exist in any countries. USA, Australia, those are very important for Japan as a supplier. Political policy changes and investment, and then the policy changes and additional costs, those points are assumed as risks, and I understand those risks exist. So regarding geopolitical risks plus change risks, I do understand. Now, especially the geopolitical risk, as you mentioned, any country, there's a country risk. So in those points, it's very necessary to separate. And regarding Middle East, yes, Holmes, Plato has a very unstable situation. And if you see the history, Holmes, Plato was terminated, and then LNG to Japan, that didn't really was so critical for Japan. So actually it's about understanding and how you think about it. So that's why we need foreign affairs, and foreign affairs is very necessary. So Middle East stable supply is very important, and we must understand once again this situation. Thank you. Thank you. Do you have, we would like to take other questions, maybe the person sitting next to the participant. Thank you. I am Nelly from public sector. Thank you so much for these three panelists. I have been in the finance ministry, and I did some negotiation for Middle East. Also, I was working in Iraq after the war. So I would like to ask, this is maybe something that Jason mentioned. IEA last year, September, mentioned 2035 and beyond, OPEC and the Middle East would have maybe more demand, and that was like the report. So having said that, maybe for future supply, maybe the three countries of the Middle East and connections, how do we manage, especially the foreign affairs? And this is for Mr. Jason. IEA is, of course, OPEC. They have a frequent exchange with discussions, and Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Venezuela, or these countries' connections. IEA, for IEA, how do you think long-term handling for 2030 and mid and beyond? Yanagisawa-san also had some thoughts. I would like to also hear about Yanagisawa-san's thoughts and INPEC's thoughts regarding Abu Dhabi asset. These, I would like to know midterm, long-term management, foreign affairs. How would you expect the government? Thank you so much. Maybe we can ask Jason, but IEA, like you mentioned, OPEC, Saudi, Iran, Iraq, Venezuela, you've mentioned. So the midterm, long-term relation. So is that what you would like to ask? So maybe we will ask Jason first to answer, and then Yanagisawa-san to answer how these three country collaboration can happen, and then maybe a public sector, Ezuka-san could answer about the chances.
So thank you. So that's definitely always been the question for the IEA, is the relationship with the OPEC producer countries. Even the creation of the IEA as kind of a counterpoint to OPEC countries evolved very quickly into being more of a counterparty. Working together with OPEC has been a strong objective of the IEA over its course of history in its 50 years existence, trying to see the stable oil markets as a joint objective, and understanding the perspectives both of consumers and producers has been critical in that. The IEA system of responding in a global oil disruption is to look towards bridging the gap necessary between the disruption and additional spare capacity being brought online. So it's always been a critical point, and the IEA has done in-depth work on developing a good relationship with OPEC and discussing their positions on the market. Also, their views on the future of oil demand, oil supply, and the balance is something that we've looked to develop. I know the IEF was created in just that occasion, is to develop the dialogue between producers and consumers in better understanding the future market trends and market needs, and understanding that we have the possibility of a win-win. Of course, concentration of oil coming from the Middle East has its own challenges because of, I mentioned, the choke points that they travel through. Also, just the geopolitical concentration that we know it can be very tricky in the region. So it is significant that we continue to work together, but also understanding their perspective of the need to diversify their energy sources and look to diversifying their economies to not be as heavily reliant on revenues from oil and gas in the future. So I think that the importance will be dialogue, continuing dialogue, but nevertheless remaining vigilant with our system, able to respond on global markets.
Thank you very much. As you mentioned, that the Middle East oil producing companies are internationally competitive, so that the OPEC countries would be the one of the last man standing. So that how that Japan address with this situation? The IEA and OPEC and IEF jointly organize international forums. So those are the great mechanism to continue dialogue. Japan is able to claim its positions and make the business case to make the contribution to the international market. Concurrently, that we are able to strengthen that bilateral relationship, not only the oil and the gas, right? So that diversified economic structure is critical for the Middle East countries that include that the new energy or entertainment. Those are the business sectors that Japan is very strong, and the Japan make the contribution to the Middle East countries. So that could be the win-win business model or win-win bilateral relationship. And those very stable relationship contributes to the stable energy supply for Japan. Thank you. So let me make some perspectives. If I may repeat, that the stable investment environment, and one of the keywords is that how to build a win-win business model. So if we consider the country risk, that the one business, one private company is unable to control the country risk. So the typical example is that as a Dagan, so that that is a great takeaway for a company. So what we could do for that so that we have been doing for the several decades in Abu Dhabi, that 6 decades in Indonesia, 5 decades in Australia, so that there are countries that we have built a long-term great relationships, so that we know those countries. And together with that Japanese needs and demand, and we have to pay attention to the counterparties' demand and situations. And we also anticipate that the support from the government. So there is no golden rule where there is no one-fits-all solution. Thank you very much. Are there any? Does anybody have any more questions, comments on the floor? Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is Daniel Barton from the Australian Embassy. As everybody knows, Australia is the resource-rich country exporting a lot of the natural resources to Japan. We are exporting gas and coal. And Japan is a very important strategic trading partner. And we would like to continue this good relationship and the trading relationship, and that the traditional energies like the gas and the coal continues to be important. Now that you mentioned that the diversification of the oil-producing countries are the key, yeah, that's true. And at the same time, the number of that export countries are limited in case of the gas, natural gas, or critical minerals. Of course, that Japan and Australia are the strategic allies. And we are looking at the like-minded allies and partner countries. And Japan also purchasing that oil and gas from diversified countries. I would like to simplify my questions as much as possible, but Mr. Ezuka mentioned country risk differs one country to another, right? It's a matter of the level. In Australia, the country risk is low in Australia, but there are some policy changes to impact the cost of that oil production or coal production. And politicians they formulate the policies looking at the domestic situations and diplomatic situations. So that is a policymaker's job. But what is the company's role? For the sake of the Japanese citizens' needs for the secure energy supply, of course, that private company can play a role, a certain role. Sorry for my long question. Thank you very much. Let me wrap up your question. The first question, so that how to balance, how to compare diversifying the source of the energy and to cherish the long-term allies and partner countries. How to balance those relationships? That question goes to Dr. Yanagisawa. And the change in the Australian domestic policies may impact the energy policies or the energy business with Japan, how to do that. Okay, thank you very much for your question. Well, typically that I'm looking at the gas market, and the 40% of the gas that gas consumption in Japan relies on Australia. Australia is one of the most critical countries for Japan, so that we will strengthen the bilateral relationship with the like-minded allies and partner countries. We cannot deny that. But when we think about holistic energy securities, we have to increase the preparedness. For anything could happen to any countries. If that supply of the oil or the coal from Australia could disrupted and stopped, that could produce a detrimental impact to Japan. Therefore, there are countries, the relationship is not as close as Australia, but there are some possible oil-producing countries in Asia. So that we need to diversify the fossil fuel sources, not only depending on oil, not only on the gas. So we have to diversify the fossil fuel resources so that the oil, gas, and LNG, so that implementing that countermeasures with the environmental climate change, and that we have to diversify that the fossil fuel. And Japan is also committed to the net zero, meaning that increasing that dependence on the renewable energy. So that diversification in any form is the key. Of course, the degree differs for one country to another. So for the more secure supply of that energies, that both government and the private sector recognize the importance of the diversification in any shape. Thank you very much for your question. Yes, that Australia, I stayed in Australia for the 7 years until that the June last year, so that we overcame COVID-19 and that the Australian administration changed, and there is a political fluctuate. I understand that the politics has been changing and evolving rapidly in Australia. So the question is that what the one private company can do. But anyway, maybe that we could do one thing, whether it is diversification or maybe superseding a multifaceted relationship. It is so hard to switch from traditional system to the very innovative system, so that we be very careful of the complying with the local regulations. But at the same time, that we need to have the offensive mind, that we would like to make very proactive investment, so that we would like to disseminate to create the importance of that investment-friendly situation. Thank you very much. So there are several questions from that online participants that it is reported that 15 to 20% of that the domestic supply changed to the new. Japan has 8% produced in every 20% of the gas and oil, so that what mechanism that the government of Japan used to import oil and the gas specifically in Asian region. So as Mr. Yanagisawa mentioned, that the key is the sustained and continuous dialogue, and we need to communicate our perspective as the investment country and obtain that buy-in and understanding from the host country. We have some more time left. Does anybody have any more questions? Thank you. I have two questions. First of all, so you mentioned that the first oil crisis or second oil crisis that Dr. Yanagisawa talked in his presentation. In the future, the things like oil and LNG, putting the gas on the side because it is connected by pipeline. So that supply countries is able to weaponize oil and the gas. So that could you share your possible scenarios, if that scenario is possible, or what sort of scenarios you can think of? For instance, the China weaponized that critical minerals that raised that attentions, and that is a very controversial issue. So in the world with energy, I think that scenario does not apply to that. So maybe the situation is a little bit different. So that what is your take? And the disruption of the supply or discontinuation of the supply. If that the producing countries have the very few is not incentivized to stop that supply. So if that the massive disruption of the supply occurs, if it defines, it is hard to avoid that situation. Of course, that one solution is to stop that raising the warfare in the Middle East, but the diplomatic measures is limited. And the question is that the supply will completely stop, even if that the massive amount of the oil supply is stopped, but other countries take over the vacant supply of that Middle East. And that leads to the soaring that prices. And that situation could be controlled by the demand consumer countries to control the international price of the oil. Mr. Elliott mentioned that ERE, so that a very sudden and abrupt spike of the price, how to address with the spike. So could you please share the initiative to control the sudden spike of the oil price? Thank you very much. So to the first question, if that supplying country, the producing countries is weaponize that those oil or gas, are there any scenarios as possible? That question goes to the Yanagisawa. And are there any special initiative to address with the spike of the oil price or disruption, sudden disruption of the massive supply?
Yeah, so at that time, during oil crisis, at that time, there was some UAE emerging country, and also national oil was very much controversial and a threat. 50 years ago, we had that oil crisis, so we had some learning. So even the producing countries, supplying countries, we had a platform that is constituted today that is very different from 50 years ago. So at that back then, during the oil crisis, there was a magnitude weaponized. I think we have decreased that risk. However, if we see this regarding oil, gas, resources, those countries who hold resources, for their political goal, if they weaponize and kind of make a threat, that kind of linguist is, although they wouldn't say we're going to stop this, the supplier country who are supplying, it's for the importers, it's that we can't stand strong, and oil LNG does have a very big effect, and we do bring impact to that. So it is very difficult situation, and for Japan, when it comes to handling those countries and collaborating with them regarding producing for economics, we can take it as a con, and for oil LNG, it is a product and it will be a market product, so we cannot import if we don't see the business impact. So we do need the supply to be the consumers. Also, it can't be a resource production that doesn't produce economy. So we do need to say that merit and having a beneficiary is very important. So for weaponizing, it is very important to have diplomacy and foreign affairs and dialect.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you.
それでは2問目です。
ありがとうございます。
Number one importance is a fluid market, a well-functioning market, and so countries that are seeking to use the weaponization of their energy, of their exports, can be dissuaded by the fact that there are alternatives in the market that can fill the gap. And so that was kind of the point of the IEA at the beginning, is to be able to counteract that sort of embargo on supplies. And I think with the much more fluid markets, that becomes less of a risk. And it was recognized that, in fact, the emergency response of the IEA wasn't necessarily for when there was no supply, when it completely cut off supplies, but rather that markets would have a price reaction. There would be a price spike in the case of a disruption, and the time necessary for markets to return to normal functioning. And that destructive nature of the price spike to our economies is what we really began to focus on, is how to respond, which meant in the evolution of the IEA system is responding, actually being much more flexible in the circumstances, in the scenario that we respond, not waiting for a disruption. If you look at the original system of the IEA, there was percentage triggers of supply disruption, so a 7% disruption to supplies. But in fact, it was then recognized that a disruption can be a much smaller percentage of global or domestic supply, but that the price impact can be just as destructive. And so the response needs to be very rapid, that assures market fluidity in that disruption. We saw in 2022 with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia that the markets were looking at how to deal with the displacement of Russian supply with alternative supplies. The role of strategic stocks became very critical in giving the liquidity to the market to deal with that transition to the new market context. I think that's always going to be the case because strategic stocks are never going to be big enough to be a market supplier. They're always the buffer in the system to add on top of industry's ability to respond. But the IEA system is a very robust system. We have 1.24 billion barrels of strategic reserves. Those are stocks held exclusively for emergency release in case of a need. In addition to that, there's about 600 million barrels of stocks being held by industry under an obligation that can only be used through government decision to release. And so that massive amount of response that can be brought to bear in a market in a disruption actually also has a very reassuring aspect, that knowing that we see tensions in the Middle East currently, and we do see a price response to that. I haven't looked at prices today, but we've seen Brent at about 70, 71 and WTI at about $66. I think that if there weren't strategic stocks available to back up in the case of that, we would see a much, much higher market response already before seeing any actual kinetic actions in the region or seeing any actual disruptions. And so there's always an important aspect of the psychological buffer that's there, but then the ability to bring those stocks to bear, that's the mechanisms in each country that is able to take a decision and take the acts to implement the release of those stocks in a very quick way. The IEA system can do that within 24 to 48 hours. That's critical to have that sort of alternative to market supply. I think a lot of effort is also being done in the LNG markets to look at that sort of built-in liquidity that can be brought to bear whenever there's a disruption.
ありがとうございます。ちょっとお時間が近づいてまいりました。で、最後に、ちょっと。
Thank you so much. We do have online questions, but we are very short with time.
一つは、塚様の方に、ちょっと今日のテーマと、
First question is for Ezuka-san. Energy transition perspective. What kind of projects and what will you be doing in the future projects? This is the question. Also, another question which we would like to take. LNG will have a higher demand in the future. Also supply also would have a high, and mid-term, long-term, maybe LNG will be too much. Like Mr. Elliott said, supplying not ability higher. So this will be, how would this impact Japan's energy? How to stop?
So that's the first question goes to Etsuka-san, and the second one is goes to Nagisa-san. Now, energy. So the question is how to address that energy transition. There are several, 2 or 3 examples that I could state. Number one, in general, that as in the oil and the gas industry, that's the industry 101, that is the reduction of emissions, like bringing down the emission of the GHG, and we are promoting that initiative internationally. And the second one, it is a carbon capture storage initiative. So now that we are emitting the CO2 that coming from that underground, so that is called reservoir CO2, and that we will capture the CO2 and bury it underground. So that is a second initiative that we would like to promote, and that is something that we will implement in Australia Exio project, and that in the Tokyo Metropolitan Area CCS project in Chiba, that we capture the CO2 from that steel mills and put them together and bury it in underwater. The third one is how to capture the hydrogen. Now, so far, the demand for the hydrogen has not been sufficient because of the cost, but at our company, that we started a demonstrative trial plant in Kashiwazaki, Chiba Prefecture, using the locally produced hydrogen and hydrogen plus ammonia, and generate power and buried that the remaining hydrogen into the underground. It has not been commercialized, but those demonstration experiment is conducive to facilitate and promote our new businesses. Thank you very much for your question. As you pointed out, so there are several different forecasts for supply demand of the energy in the future, and in our organization IEEJ announced that their 10-year projections. Some observers say that the supply exceeds the demand of the energy. When we look at LNG supply capacities, is going to grow in the FY 2030, so that the growth of the supply exceeds that of the demand, but it is the capacity. It is not operating ratio. The currently operating ratio is more than 90%. It's a different story. Also, the prices of that building materials soar because of the sticky inflation that impacted the capacity of the supply, and those soaring inflation prices of the raw materials, building materials, and inflation make that delay the completion of the project. And the price of the LNG would be softened for some time. And if that LNG price got ease, that there is a switch from the oil to the LNG that stimulates the demand for LNG in Asian countries. Therefore, so there is a possibility of the increasing demand or stimulated demand, and the increase of the supply that would not lead to oversupply. Something happens at the supply side that would tighten the market, so that the scenario would sustain. So that would not lead to the massive disruption, the massive imbalance of the demand supply. And it is critical that we continue the investment in the LNG supply so that we will deepen that dialogue of that the LNG producing countries, increasing that transparency, and for under the scenario of the softening LNG price, that Japan needs to conclude that long-term strategic contract with LNG supplying countries. Of course, that the Japan had a lot of the long-term contract of the LNG, but if we did nothing, that conditions would be disadvantageous for Japan, so that it is our job to conclude that long-term strategic contracts to secure the stable supply. So that in that situation, that the private sector is very grateful of that meaningful diplomatic support from the Japanese government. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that time is up. So there are several questions that we are unable to pick up, but thank you very much for a lot of the questions. For the security, energy securities, we have seen a lot of the very fruitful discussions and diverse discussions in the past, but today that we are able to listen to very fruitful discussion, compelling and stimulating discussion. There are a lot of the insights and there are a lot of takeaways that therefore we would like to continue the communication and continue the relationship with all of you.